In the rotation of the AFL and many sports, there are multiple ways to acquire players to build a winning team. Typically, you can go secure them through free agency signings and trades with other teams, but the biggest risk, highest reward method is through the draft. The AFL draft involves picking 18-year-old kids fresh out of high school from the local representative teams and bringing them to your team in the hope that they will become stars of the league in a few years' time. Unlike the American leagues, it was only recently that teams have started to spend a lot of money scouting the junior leagues looking for the right talent. In previous decades, it was very common to see number 1 picks hardly playing a season and 50th picks tearing the league apart. But despite all the developments in scouting, picking which kids are going to turn into 300 gamers and which are going to fizzle out in the limelight is a lot of guesswork. Which is why when teams get it right, it's so impressive. And there's one team that does it as good, possibly if not better, than anyone else. The fairy tale premiership of the Western Bulldogs from 2016 has had plenty of commentary around its incredible nature and circumstances. Coming from 7th with a young team and coach, breaking a 62-year premiership drought. But one of the more interesting things about the 2016 flag is how they built the team that won it all. And surprisingly, it's nearly all from the draft. 19 of the 22 2016 premiership players had been Bulldogs the entire time they were in the league. For context, during Hawthorn's three-peat, they averaged only 15 of their 22 being drafted at Hawthorn, and the rest taken from other clubs. And Richmond and West Coast both had 16 of 22 premiership players acquired through the draft for their flags in recent years. For the Dogs to get just 3 premiership players from other clubs in 16 is a strange occurrence. So, how did they do it? Although a largely young team, building this list started all the way back in the early 2000s. In 2001, the Pups drafted the guy that would go on to play the most ever games from a player from the rookie draft. Matthew Boyd was a touch machine for the Dogs in his early and later years, averaging 27 possessions in the flag year, at pick 22 in the rookie draft. The Dogs were still relevant, but transitioning from aging stars like Tony Liberatore and Scott Wind into a younger core. Boyd went on to make 2 All-Australian teams. In 2004, the Dogs got 100 scored on them 18 out of 22 rounds, and so when they went to the draft, they were looking for defenders late in the order to reduce the scoring barrages that they were frequently on the wrong end of. And the most successful came out of Werribee at number 19 in the rookie draft again, where they snagged a young buck, Dale Morris. Moz went on to play 253 games at the club, including an All-Australian appearance. And a common trend has already arisen and will continue to be seen, with a lot of these players coming off the rookie draft. The rookie list, for those unaware, allows for clubs to keep extra players outside of their limited 38-man squads. These rookies can't play until they're elevated to the senior list, but can train and demonstrate their abilities. The Bulldogs recruiters not only had a knack for spotting talent, but also untapped potential that was then able to be nursed at the club into realisation. Now is as good a time as ever to start crediting the recruitment managers behind these eventual genius draft picks. And back in this portion of the Dogs' history, most of the kudos needs to go to Scott Clayton, who worked as Footscray's chief talent spotter upon leaving Brisbane in 1998 after virtually building the entire Lions three-peat team. He spotted Boyd and Morris at low picks, knowing he didn't need to take them high, and elevated them quickly to the senior lists. Fast forward through to 2007, where a young man was running out his high school years on a cricket scholarship at Geelong Grammar. Easton Wood did not play junior representative footy, which is the usual way to get spotted. Instead, Scott Clayton saw Easton get a run for Geelong Grammar in a school footy game and told him to declare for the draft. A smoky heading in, the Dogs took him at pick 43 in the national draft, with Clayton seeing something in his leaping ability. The following year, in 2008, the Dogs began their first of 3 preliminary final runs. In this time, their draft picks were being used on players they believed would strengthen their depth and possibly shore them up for a lengthy period of success, although were unlikely to crack the side at the time. Coinciding with this new attitude of future-proofing was the hiring of Simon Dalrymple as a development coach who would eventually transition into their head role of national recruiting manager. With him and Scott Clayton at the helm, they drafted tall, and among others, at pick 31, Jordan Roughead was a response to the lack of height the Dogs list was crippled by against big marking teams. The Roughead name made famous already at Hawthorn by Jordan's cousin Jared. The Dogs were impressed by Jordan's slick agility for a guy of his size. It is, however, important to note here that the Dogs didn't always get it right. They used their earlier pick in that year, number 14, maintaining systemic height across the entire 08 draft class, to take Ace Cordy. At 204 centimetres, they assumed he could fix their ruck problems for the foreseeable future. But he didn't eventuate where Jordan Roughhead did 15 picks later. As much as the Bulldogs' talent scouts were proficient, some players excelled in the Dog system and others didn't, as with most clubs. But we'll speak more on that later. That same year, they took at pick 30 on the rookie draft the man who would become the most valuable player of the 2016 finals. Another rookie list success. However, Liam Picken was promoted to the senior list almost immediately, building off his Williamstown form, excelling as a much-needed tagger. After a flat draft year in 09 with limited selections after a very good season, in 2010 they saw an absolute no-brainer, as Brownlow medalist and club champion Tony Liberatore's son Tom was on the draft board. With the dodgy father-son rule allowing Premier players to drop low, Tom was reserved by the Dogs at pick 41 and debuted round 1 2011. Tom was drafted as a physical inside mid, winning an eventual best and fairest in 2014. The dawn of the new decade was where the Dogs' premiership team really started to emerge without them even realising. 2011 was a compromised draft because GWS were handed nearly the entire top prospect list by the AFL as they were incepted. But at pick 17, the Bulldogs took an on-field enforcer, Clay Smith, set to become a cult figure in the western suburbs. Head recruiters suggested that Clay had the toughness to replace the hole that was left by departing Callan Ward. Injuries hampered Smith throughout his career, but when his body was right, he was sharper than most, and reaped the ultimate reward 5 years into his career, after 3 knee reconstructions. At pick 57, the Dogs hunted for someone who could turn opportunities into goals, as the likes of Barry Hall and Jason Ackermanis were on their way out. Mature age recruit Tory Dixon was their answer, and a fine one he was, returning 50-goal seasons before ultimately snagging premiership success. In the rookie draft that year, the Dogs used pick 22 on yet another success story, Luke Dalhouse, soon to become the face of the club's membership campaigns with his dreadlocks and gritty small forward play. Flourishing in the system, Dalhouse ended up in the 40-man All-Australian squad multiple times, and stands as one of the Dogs' biggest rookie draft insights. Pick 39 in the rookie draft exemplified the Bulldogs' prowess when it came to talent scouting. Jason Johannesson didn't pick up the game of AFL until he was a teenager, as he spent the first 8 years of his life in South Africa. His speed around the footy was spotted by now head recruiter Simon Dalrymple, and he was picked up. Dalrymple noted that JJ was effectively taken 140th overall, which is one of the larger returns on such a low pick of all time, as he would develop eventually into a Norm Smith medalist. Dalrymple said, "Jason was a boy who only averaged 10 to 12 possessions for East Fremantle Colts and only played half a year of Colts footy, so he's come a long way." The preseason draft, which occurs prior to the start of the AFL season as opposed to the end of the last season, saw the Dogs snag an unlikely premiership hero, Fletcher Roberts. Lanky but mobile, the Dogs wanted an inside tall, but quickly adapted Fletch into a key defender, with some tall tasks over the course of his career. Recruiters at the Dogs, including Dalrymple and list manager Jason McCartney, waited to get Roberts as they knew he would take a while to develop due to a lack of conditioning. It was this foresight that allowed the recruiting team to predict players' positioning and potential ahead of time, and an instinct that the Bulldogs were blessed to have. This era also saw the Dogs drop on-field form, missing multiple final series, and as a result, accruing some higher draft picks. The following year's draft was even more successful than the last. At their earliest pick, they selected the man who would become the biggest public personality in the team, and was selected for his ability to be a highlight reel, bringing not only goal-scoring forward craft, but also putting people in seats. Jake Stringer lived up to all that at pick number 5, and despite his divisive personality and the fact that he was only 21 despite looking 42 when they won the flag, the package lived up to all of it, snagging an All-Australian in 2015. The national recruiters did a lot of homework on Stringer, suggesting that his power and football smarts were years ahead of his true age. Back-to-back picks spelled back-to-back success because Jackson McRae was taken at pick 6 and has developed into an All-Australian regular, nearly always topping the most disposals list. McRae was a key element of the 16 side, but developed into an absolute superstar since. They snagged Lockie Hunter at pick 41 under father-son. These Bulldog father-son picks were pretty obvious and nearly all of them paid off. Lockie turned into a quintessential winger with a sharp left boot, filling an incidental hole in the playing list despite being a guaranteed father-son selection, and winning a best and fairest in the process. 2013 typified the Bulldogs' poor form and saw them pull the highest in the draft they had to date, pick number 4, and they spent that pick on the piece de resistance of the eventual premiership. A little Italian boy named Marcus Bontempelli, eventual All-Australian, consistently near the top of the Brownlow votes and dual best and fairest including in a premiership year, a novelty feat only accomplished by the great E.J. Whitten, who Bont has drawn numerous comparisons with. Simon Dalrymple said after the 2013 draft that they did a lot of character research into Bontempelli prior to drafting him, talking in depth with his school and friends, and made the assessment that a full-time system would allow him to realise his potential. Because most draft boards had Bont going much lower than pick 4, but in the conversation as the best in the game right now means they certainly wouldn't regret a thing. 2014 was an interesting year. Departures of captain Ryan Griffin, Adam Cooney and Sean Higgins, as well as pick 6 in the draft they had earned from a measly 14th place finish in a trade for Tom Boyd. The club was going through what President Peter Gordon described as a crisis. They seemed to largely lack direction, and this meant that despite poor results, the Dogs were unable to rely on high picks for personnel. Despite this, the recruiting team still had ideas about the team they wanted to construct, and at number 26 they scouted Toby McLean for his inside play and head over the footy mentality that fit perfectly into the system of players they were going for. McLean became proficient in the string handball game that made the Dogs successful. And all the way down at pick 46, they acquired who Matthew Lloyd now believes is possibly the greatest either foot kick the game has ever seen. Caleb Daniel was overlooked by nearly the entire draft board, presumably due to his height. But his target hitting efficiency and decision making meant he finished second in the Rising Star and made his first All-Australian team this year. Lower again at pick 62, the Dogs picked up Zane Cordy as another key defender to try and take away a big body. A shot in the dark, Cordy was another example of a low pick that blossomed into a regular and ended up kicking the first Bulldog goal on that fateful day in October. The final piece of the draft puzzle came in 2015, just a year before the flag, when at pick 25, the Dogs snagged Josh Dunkley, a tall midfielder who played a number of games in his first season, which ended up being a premiership start. Although Dunks wasn't the most impactful player at the time, post-2016 he got the All-Australian squad nod and has developed into an absolute midfield star. Amazingly, only 3 of these 19 players were taken in the top 10 of any draft, with a whopping 6 players coming out of the rookie draft, a draft that has an incredibly low rate of converting into stars. But 4 of these players ended up making All-Australian squads. If you look through the drafts, you'll note that the Bulldogs, as previously mentioned, didn't always get it right, and for every successful draft pick, there is a bust to go with them. But the undeniable amount of success stories allow for the right amount of speculation that the Bulldogs have impeccable ability to spot talent from a mile away. President Peter Gordon attests to the idea that Scott Clayton, Simon Dalrymple and their teams put in the absolute hard yards to assess character and skills of potential draftees, monitoring players constantly at junior levels. Interestingly, the Bulldogs have actually been very poor at signing and trading big-name players, with a few famous exceptions, but their attention to detail when it comes to drafting is historically impressive, and their trend appears to continue. Another aspect of these draft success stories is the prospect that they clearly fit into the Bulldog system extremely well, which begs the question whether the system accelerates development in young players, or whether these are just the players that slipped in best out of the many picks they had over the years, and hence rose to the top. The Bulldogs often put in frequent games into their draft picks no matter how low they were taken, and this early exposure could be a reliable method of realising potential, as could the generally praised culture in the playing group of the Western Bulldogs, particularly during this decade, even through their challenging times on field. This blueprint can be adopted by a lot of teams in the league, as the majority of these picks occurred over the course of just 5 years, and it's undeniable that going to the draft can and will build you a premiership team, a fact that the Dogs were very happy to discover. The series of drafts were the keys to give the Bulldogs the tools to break a 62-year drought in fairy tale fashion, and the nature of which it came about is a story for another day.